They've had some great success in the Black Sea. The Black Sea fleet is being chewed up and spat out, essentially. The commander's being replaced. Also, what they've done in Crimea is really smart. They've smashed out some of the air defense around there, the sort of strategic air defense, which has allowed them the capability to get in and start hitting more of the Black Sea fleet, for example, and then start hitting other radar sites. So they've managed to really degrade Russia's ability to defend certainly Western Crimea. And that's significant. It's been one of the more optimistic parts of the whole war the last year for Ukraine. On the weapons, one of the interesting things about this the Russian Kharkiv attack is that some people are saying, well, one of the Ukrainians have been pushing Blinken to allow them to use US-made weapons on Russian forces inside Russia. And one of the reasons this is... So normally, say, if Russia is attacking in Donbass or Zaporizhia, they're attacking from Ukrainian-held territory. Therefore, the Ukrainians are allowed to use US missiles against them. But in this case, they're attacking directly from Russia because the border is on it. And therefore, Ukraine couldn't use those weapons. And that makes it a bit more... certainly the Ukrainians would say, well, that hands in a significant advantage to the Russians. So we'll have to wait and see if the US is ready to lift that too. The long range attack, of course, we're going to see the strategy go on. They're going for the refineries. It makes a lot of sense. They're looking for the pressure point, whether it's beyond harassment, and reducing capacity of the Russian, oil output by anything more than 10%. We'll have to wait and see. It has a political effect if it can get into the serious kind of reductions.
And the buffer zone theory, I understand in theory, but in practice, how effective is that buffer zone? Because Ukraine has had success for years now at striking targets quite deep inside Russia, and with the provision of these new long-range ATACMS the US are sending, will it actually work, the buffer zone?
Yeah, not really on that. And drone range, think about it, 120 miles at least, and some of them, getting to Moscow. So I think it's more political, it's political and strategic. It's like, I've created a buffer zone all across my border with Ukraine. And what is it an eye on? How does this end? And what do I need? Yeah. And if Putin is thinking 6 months out, a year out, that kind of thing, and he's looking at what could actually happen and what does a peace look like? And I don't want a border at any point with Ukraine. I think that's it, essentially. So that's why you do it. And it's fairly low risk with some good potential outcomes for him. So.
And do you think if their objective is to create this buffer zone, do you think that means that Russia may stop short of going all the way to Kharkiv city if it can?
I think that's a suck it and see. It depends, because you reinforce success. What do they have? So the general consensus here is like, you look for a force composition to work out what is the intent. And from my limited, open source understanding is one of the things that trusted people who look at this very closely that I would follow would say there's lacking any, at the moment, identified armor to do a major exploit. Yeah. The second point is, the defensive form of warfare is in the ascendancy because of the ubiquitous intelligence, surveillance, target acquisition, reconnaissance, digital space. It's very difficult to mass armor without being seen and then break through. So it's difficult. The only really way you can do it is if the forces collapse. Yeah, if the force you're attacking, the morale and cohesion just break, the communication break, and then you can just drive. But if they stay and fight and they buy some time for intelligence assets and surveillance assets to be brought onto the location, things are seen pretty easy. And most forces, especially armor, have to disperse. So, and of course, their combined effect is when they're together and use a mass for shock to break through. So you can see why it gets very difficult to mass and break through. It doesn't mean it's impossible, but it's much more difficult than, say, it was. Well, let's think, even in 2003 against Iraq, we saw mass armor drive through. Granted, Iraq didn't have great intelligence, but this change in technology means that even middle power nations like Russia can access it much cheaper.
I wanted to get your reaction, Patrick, to the breaking news we had just before we started recording, which is the President Zelensky says he has cancelled all forthcoming foreign visits. What is the significance of that?
Difficult to tell exactly. It looks like, as we're talking about it, it's these smaller villages around the on the border, which the Ukrainians have withdrawn from. What does it indicate? Really, probably that this is some form of crisis management, that they need to stabilize the front. My understanding as of last night around Vovchansk, not in these villages further out than Vovchansk onto the border, was that things were starting to stabilize because they'd moved more Ukrainian troops in. Now, Russia do have a foothold there. I mean, the kind of thing you'd probably do with Vovchansk if you were planning this is try to cut it off and go around it. Actually, you wouldn't go into it if you didn't have to. So that's my understanding of it at the moment. It's probably some form of crisis management. There might be politics about this. He doesn't need to be distracted. He needs to focus on the front, maybe. There's that. I mean, there's also the security element, because it's good to see Blinken get in there so soon after the removal of the colonel in charge of the presidential security. So it's good to have had a grip on that, because that was a high vote of confidence in that system. So there could be a security element too.
And probably symbolically significant as well, even though many might say, actually, Zelensky is possibly at his most effective when he's traveling the world drumming up support for Ukraine.
Yeah, does it say, is it internal foreign visits? Is that a distraction because I need to be hosting people? That was such a big entourage which would have come with Blinken and so much planning gone into it? Or is it, I'm not going anywhere? And both make sense if you've got a pressing issue on the front, and you need to deal with that. So I don't know. We'll just have to wait and see which it is exactly. But look, it certainly indicates that there's a sense that attention needs to be focused domestically and on the front at the moment, rather than drumming up support, as it were. I mean, the Blinken visit was interesting as well, because it was all about timelines and kit. And the Ukrainians are looking for the Patriot systems. Now, we think they've got somewhere between 3 and 5 in country at the moment. They're looking for another 7 more. I think Germany yesterday said they'll find one, which is great news. The US would be great if they gave them more. I think Blinken's of the opinion that they should. And then they were talking about timelines. How long does it take to get in? Where are they? The US, we know, has got, pre-positioned stocks of stuff in Germany. They could get them across. The Patriot systems can be moved by strategic airlift. So they can get them across fairly quickly. And I think that's the number one concern for the Ukrainians, because the Russians are starting to get into a bit of a groove with using their, first of all, hitting some of the Patriot, not the actual batteries, but some of the launchers themselves we've seen the last few months. They're, say, down in Zaporizhia, their air force is a bit more active. That means they're getting their electronic warfare bubble and their own air defense out to put a bubble. This is what the Russians like to do. You put the bubble over the front line and further back, and then get your air in to support, and then you can keep going a bit more. So there's certainly the long-range air defense, which is the Patriot, is really important. Then there's the short-range air defense. Now, that can get in really quickly because they're Stinger missiles, etc., and man-pads. So, but that's pressing too. So, and then of course artillery, where the Ukrainians are outgunned, I don't know, 5 to 1-ish at the moment a day. Just the Russians are firing maybe 10,000 shells a day, the Ukrainians 2,000. Production in the US is ramping up. The Czechs have done well to source almost 500,000 on the open market and support. But it's coming from a low base, and the Ukrainians need more. So it's rising, but so is Russia rising too. It's put its economy 75% on a war footing, banging out the shells, pulling tanks out of storage and producing more. So, it's a contest of economies at the moment.
And logistically, how straightforward is it to increase the tempo of deliveries of these munitions? I mean, you would have thought that America would be pretty keen to do everything possible to get these weapons to the front line even before this latest Russian offensive. But is it easy? Is it straightforward to say, okay, we're going to increase the tempo?
Okay, so the US military, of course, would have been planning off for this, and the logisticians ready to go with their with their, what you call it, the truck loaders, the forklifts ready to go to move the stuff by crate. The second the bill was signed, bang, go, get stuff out there. So there's that element. It depends, of course, James, on what kit you're moving. Like so as I mentioned, like you can move some stuff with strat list. Some of it's to do with cost and demand. How absolutely pressing is this demand? Get it over on a strat lift. If not, if there's some lag time, we need to get some shells over to them on strat lift, but we can move the others by boat. Well, we'll do that. So it depends. And obviously there's pre-positioned stuff in Europe. There's factories in Europe. So it's all obviously a complicated system behind it. But what I would say is the Russians, it's strategically what's happened here. Okay, the delay in US aid, it should have come in October. All right, the summer offensive failed, and clearly Ukraine was going to have to go on the defensive for a while. If that aid had come in October, we wouldn't be here, I don't think. Okay, the delay in aid, and it's important to point out, although 60 billion is voted through, it's about